When it comes to estate planning, as counterintuitive as it sounds, most people don't actually worry about passing on as much as they worry about what happens to their loved ones after they're gone. Some things that we commonly hear are, I trust my kids, but I don't trust life, whether that be divorce, children fighting after you're gone, etc. We also hear, I don't want my money to change their motivation or the things that they do in life. I don't want siblings drifting apart, as I had mentioned earlier. And I don't want what took me many years to accumulate or build to be gone in a few years. Estate planning isn't really about transferring money as much as it is about transferring judgment. Today's episode is going to focus less on the basics of estate planning, which we've covered in the past, i.e. wills or probate. Today, what we're going to focus more on is whether your estate plan protects your children after you're gone or simply transfers money in hopes for the best.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Gentlemen, before we get started, I just need to know what's new and exciting in life.
Well, a couple of things, but the main one was my wife and I and our family were in Key West for a long weekend, and weather was great. We had a great time, and there's a certain special celebration that we had. And maybe Ryan, you could share a little bit about that.
To all of our viewers, I got hitched last weekend. That's what we were doing down in Key West. So life's moving fast. Got married. We're buying a house, moving into the South Hills of Pittsburgh here pretty soon. So very excited. Nick, what's new and exciting with you?
So maybe to give you something to look forward to in the future, I have an 18-month-old, as many in the audience know, and she sang the other day, I think every third word of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. My wife said, kind of vaguely, getting through the lyrics, at one word at a time. So she's been a lot of fun lately. She's in this expressive stage of talking and trying to sing as well.
That's great.
now.
I couldn't do that till I was 5 or 6, so that's incredible.
And you said that you said that your daughter likes the change in weather that we've had here in Pittsburgh. You were taking her outside and she was running around, burning off some energy.
I think any parent or former parent of young children will understand that warm weather is a game changer when you've been shut up in the house with little kids for a long time.
And one more thing to add, my wife's prayers did come true, because I think she was worrying if Ryan was ever to get married or not. So
No, I'm glad that I could answer the prayers.
yeah. And
So
one more thing too, for anyone who doesn't know out in the audience, our daughter Morgan is actually expecting in June. So I will become a grandfather real soon. And so I can start to corrupt another generation of in the family.
So if anybody watching has nicknames, funny nicknames for an emphasis on funny for grandfather, please send them in.
And I'm trying to figure out what I want to be called. I don't know yet. So
I like Chief so far. I think that's good.
yeah.
What we'll do is start with talking about what a default or a simple estate plan looks like. A simple estate plan is going to look like everything's split equally. Let's just use, for example, to the kids. It's going to feel simple, fair, and traditional. It could be as simple as having your investment accounts, you have beneficiaries, each of them inherits X percent in equal amounts. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with that, but the simple and equal approach at death doesn't always mean stability after the fact. Two categories of risk that most families don't think about are legal risk and emotional and relational risk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Ron. Ron, if you could talk about legal risk and when, ownership creates legal exposure for the beneficiaries, that would be great.
Sure. So
when someone inherits money outright, it becomes theirs legally. Like an IRA has a beneficiary. It can go from, for example, a parent to a child. Money may pass, from a will or a trust or whatever. But if I get ownership, it's mine. And so if there's a divorce, those assets are subject to going to um, the in-law, right? In my case, my spouse. If there's a lawsuit, car accident, professional liability, business, whatever, subject to that. Um, Bankruptcy, depending on how I have the business set up, I could inherit money, and if the business is not set up correctly, it could be exposed to bankruptcy risk at all. So, ownership has its risk. It has its advantages too, but it has risk along with it.
And Nick, if you could talk about the emotional or the relational risk that comes into play when we're talking about estate planning, when sudden wealth can change behavior, that would be appreciated.
So there's the emotions that happen at the time of inheritance. Then there's also a tie-in to all kinds of past emotional history in families potentially as well. So most inheritance show up in a period of really intense emotion and grief, not a period of calm, rational reflection. So inheriting money can change your behavior in a lot of different ways, especially if the inheritance is significant or life-changing relative to your current net worth. The risk tolerance of the heir can shift, career plans can change completely, spending patterns can change completely, and people can invest way out of line with how they should be invested, be that overly aggressively or too cautiously. So there's a lot that can happen with sudden inheritance in an emotionally vulnerable in time, even for people who are otherwise, responsible and very driven and organized people. Some of that comes with the fact that inheritance creates these unspoken emotional questions. Some people ask, what should I do with this? Some people feel guilty because it's not quote unquote their money, and they feel like it needs to be used or can only be used for what parents would want. And then there's questions about, well, given all that, should I invest this? Should I spend it? Should I share it? Especially if there's feelings of guilt. And this money is showing up at this moment in life when emotional clarity is at the very lowest. And we talk all the time in our investment related podcasts about how really strong emotion and investment decisions are not a good combination. And it's the same thing with this type of inheritance discussion. When you have a strong emotion like grief and you have to make a major financial decision, it can really impact your ability to make sound decisions. And the last piece of this is just related to the existing dynamics of family that may date back years before the inheritance event happens. Even if assets are divided equally upon the passing of a parent, say, the outcomes across children are probably not going to stay equal over time. People are in different life circumstances when they inherit money. They have different abilities or natural tendencies with money. So one, sibling might invest very well and very carefully. Another might be a heavy spender that depletes money quickly. And so they just get the same amount of money, 5 years later, that there could be massive differences in their financial situations that can lead to resentment and frustration and potentially damage the relationship. And that's not because anyone intended, harm, or even because anyone was negligent. It's just because money puts gas on the fire of anything that's going on emotionally already with people or in relationships or in families.
Nick, is it fair to say that most estate plans protect assets while people are alive, but then, unless planned for, pretty much every guardrail that was there when you're living, when you're not here, is gone?
Yeah, I would say most estate plans help I mean, to a certain extent, protect, but also distribute assets, right? You have the wills, beneficiaries, all that stuff. So distributing assets, but after distributed, like you said, Ryan, the guardrails are off. Most of the times, children can do whatever they want with that.
So when you're not here to control the narrative anymore, how do you control without being able to control?
So an attorney told me one time, you set up a trust when you don't trust, and I think that's a little bit too. I don't agree with that totally. It's not, again, not trusting the children. It's just not trusting
Life.
things that can happen to them. Right? There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and so the key really is that you want your children to benefit from the money. Um, but you don't need to give them like a lump sum, like a control all at once. You can sprinkle that benefit over the years with a structured process that would tend to be an irrevocable trust of some sort. Okay. And so what you're doing is, you know, you feel good about your kids, but you're trying to add these guardrails, this level of protection, so that if there's a divorce, a lawsuit, creditors, as Nick said, the psychology around sudden wealth. Some people get sudden wealth and they may go out and take amazing trips and buy, sports cars and all kind of crazy things. And then 5 years later think to themselves, oh my gosh, I wasn't very intelligent with the money. I should have really used some of it to help our lives now, but keep some of it in the trust to benefit in the future. And when I say that, when I said the trust, I shouldn't have used that. I meant if they got outright possession, they're more likely to have the ability to be wasteful in the beginning, where a trust would protect that.
So there's really two key ways that we want to talk about, how families protect stability. Um, One is protection from life events, which we've briefly introduced. And the second is protection from sudden wealth shock, which we've also briefly introduced. Ron, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into protection from life events.
Okay. So what normally would happen, the the traditional, easy, simple way, as you mentioned earlier, is you have beneficiaries, you have wills, money goes to the children, they do whatever they want. Um, and for smaller estates, that might be great. When the estate gets a little larger, another way of doing it is you have your money go to an irrevocable trust, and the trust lays out what the money can be used for. So there's a regular something called HEMS, that's health, education, maintenance, and support. So they can use the money for housing, for education, medical expenses, major life needs, right? So they can use the money. They can take out money yearly, a certain amount. Normally, a trust will say you could take out, for example, 4 or 5%, but then you could also take out money for these additional items. Again, HEMS, health, education, maintenance, and support. Okay, and so what you're really trying to do is let them live life as normal, but give them a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more. They can enjoy the money and not worry about squandering it away or being subject to divorce or lawsuit. And so the assets are, it's almost like having a tree in your neighbor's yard, and the neighbor happens to be your parent this time, and the branches are over your side with apples, so you can pick the apples. You just don't own the tree. Think of it that way with with an irrevocable trust.
Can you highlight the control piece? The person that set up the trust with intention. What kind of control after they're gone do they have in place here?
Well, so the person setting up the trust, like say, for example, my wife and I are in the process of setting up a much more advanced trust than we used to have, because the things have changed over the years. And so, what you can do, as I mentioned earlier, is say X amount could come out per year. And then on top of that, money can come out for these different, you can lay it out. You can lay out like, hey, for education, for various things, additional money can come out. In way of a trustee, you could have like you could have You could pick the most responsible child to be a trustee of all the trusts, or you could have co-trustees. There's a lot of flexibility that the parents can set up ahead of time, knowing family dynamics, understanding each, child, who's the most responsible one with money, investing wise, who's the most responsible one and way of spending, things like that.
When it comes to estate planning, is it a fair assumption to say if you can dream it or imagine it, it can be structured, or are there going to be certain limitations in terms of how you want to distribute assets or structure a trust?
Yeah, there's certain limitations, of course, you can put on. But what a lot
Not
of
so much
parents.
limitations that you can put on, but if you have very um, specific desires in terms of how you're setting up your estate or how you're setting up the trust or how it's distributed, is it kind of like the world is your oyster, or are you going to be working within some sort of limitations in terms of setting up that trust?
As a parent, you can't think of everything that's going to happen in life to each child. You just can't do it. So, what most people will do is set up a structure that is based on, for example, my wife and I, based on our wishes, based on the values that we have, and then we tried to instill in the family. So you can have overriding structure like that, but you can never think of every detail. So it's normally X amount comes out per year, and then additional money can be used for different things. You can also, and I think Nick's going to talk about this a little bit, you can also do things like, certain amount of money at different ages comes out, because you don't want all the money coming out when someone's maybe 20 or 25 years old, but maybe you don't want to wait until someone's 70 either.
Yeah, I think you said a word that resonated with me, and it's values, right? You think about being a parent. I'm not a parent right now, but I imagine most parents go through life teaching their kids, like you said, Ron, certain values, certain ways to act and behave. And some of that could be with money, some of it could just be in life in general. And what you're saying is that when establishing a trust, when establishing an estate plan, there are ways that you can actually put those values into the plan so that they are coming to real life even when you're not here.
Exactly.
Nick, can you tell us a little bit or talk a little bit about the how to protect, how to keep that control, but also maybe not even control, protect, I think is a better word, from that sudden wealth shock. Somebody passes away, sizable estate, kids come into a lot of money that they didn't have before.
This is right at the heart of what you were just saying about values, Ryan. And this, the provisions that you can put into these trusts are kind of ways of legally encoding those values into a document, so to speak. And that's really how you deal with kind of moderating the risk of sudden wealth shock. So, in the way we talked about traditional inheritance, where people just get the money outright, this in contrast says, here's the money subject to certain things that support the life that you're building, and certain types of ways that you can structure these things. You can do things like income matching. So the beneficiaries, the amount that they receive from the trust as income or can withdraw from the trust for spending is equalized to what they make. So say someone earns 80,000, the structure can supplement either 80,000 or some other amount relative to that. The reason that you would do that is because it encourages the beneficiary to continue to work, to continue to have personal ambition and structure in their life, but also gives them extra money for goals, fun, lifestyle improvement, or what have you. Another concept that's similar in terms of what it's trying to achieve is by providing gradual control of the money over time. And actually, in my own estate plan, we do this for my daughter, who is very, very young right now, but we have built in a long-term plan. So the idea is that in as beneficiaries are very young in early adulthood. They have more and more restricted access to the money, health maintenance and support, maybe small amount of distribution. And then later and later over time, maybe when they turn 25, 30, 35, the years can be customized. At different steps, they gain more ability to control the principle of the trust over time. And the idea of this is as they gain life experience and life stability and hopefully maturity and maturity with money, they're then kind of given more flexibility with the money they inherited. The reason that you would stagger it out like this is maturity rarely is associated with a single birthday. If I was 18 and I inherited $5 million, I probably would not have made very good choices with a lot
I
of the money,
I
versus
bet
much.
you I bet you Ron would agree with that. I think certain people might actually say as he's gotten older, the maturity has decreased.
Well, that happens too.
Yeah, I've regressed over the years.
You're definitely not your wife or anybody that would say that.
Yeah, so I was super serious when I was younger.
Yeah.
Not that I'm not serious now, but I definitely try to have a little bit more
Yeah,
fun.
I like to say selectively serious.
Yes, there you
Yeah.
go.
There's
That's a
work
good way
Ron,
to
and then
be.
there's outside of work Ron.
Yeah, life's too short.
Right.
Yeah. Then we talked about some of the other things. You can kind of in these documents like lay out the purposes for which money can be distributed in terms of some can be more limited than others. So for example, you can say, there's almost unlimited support for school, professional training, or starting a business. You can kind of give more flexibility potentially in areas that let's say that the spending would be more developmental or growth oriented, like personal growth oriented, as opposed to consumption oriented. And the last piece is there's these pauses you can put in for crisis protection, where a trust can be structured where if someone's determined to be facing addiction or serious financial instability or these other things, that distributions can be paused beyond essential support, just to make sure that money's not flowing out to either facilitate destructive behavior to a large degree or just being squandered. And these provisions are not meant to be a punishment. That's not why we bring this up, like, restrict all this money because no one can be trusted, so you have to put all these restrictions. It's not that. It's really providing protection and also providing some structure, particularly when you have beneficiaries who are younger or who don't have experience stewarding a significant amount of wealth.
Yeah, and part of the it I mentioned this in the beginning of the episode, but if somebody has the desire to make sure that this sudden windfall of money doesn't change the behavior of their children, what Nick was talking about is a way to protect against that. We were actually meeting with somebody recently, and they said that that was a goal of theirs, which is why we did this episode. It's not something that we hear often, and I just thought it was a really good topic to take a deeper dive on. But to summarize what Nick said, I would just say that the lifetime structures, they protect your children from things like divorce and lawsuits. The guided structure protects them from behavioral shock of sudden wealth, like we've said several times here. So together, they both provide stability. Nick, could you just talk about the trade-offs, though?
Mhm. You alluded to this a little bit before, Ryan, when you were asking about whether the world is your oyster when you set these trusts up. So there are laws that limit what you can and can't do. Some tax laws limit that as well. But the real governing factors on how detailed and complicated you want to make these documents are you're going to have to pay an attorney to draft it, and someone's ultimately going to have to administer it, usually an investment professional and a trustee working together, maybe with the attorney as well. So as you make these things more complex, they incur cost, and once they're in place, administrative complexity. So you really want to be thoughtful about making sure that these documents are drafted appropriately for the need. I've used the maybe politically incorrect phrase, you don't want to hunt a deer with a bazooka before on this podcast. And the same thing applies here in terms of don't throw the kitchen sink at like a problem that may not require it in terms of cost and complexity. So just beyond that principle, though, the standard things that you really have to do that always have to do is you need to hire an attorney who specializes in this type of law, so you ensure that the documents are drafted thoughtfully and comprehensively in relation to current laws. You really need to be thoughtful about trustee designation, since that person is really in a position as a fiduciary to exercise a lot of judgment with the administration of the trust. And then these documents should never be set it and forget it. Whenever you make an estate plan, every so often, it doesn't have to be every year, but maybe every 5 or 10 years, it's worth reviewing the documents, especially if your circumstances have changed significantly, like Ron was talking about before with his own estate plan. When you have significant changes in life stage or net worth type events, that's a good trigger to review an estate plan to make sure it's still relevant.
Yeah,
So
I'm sorry.
complexity is always what you add when you're trying to build more protection, and not everyone needs maximum complexity. It's just important that you know these options exist.
Let me add to that, if I could. Um, so maybe here's when you might not need to have a very advanced estate plan. So let's just say that your estate's not very large. Okay. Maybe your children are gainfully employed. They're very responsible for with money. They're in types of fields that are not subject to lawsuits, and you feel their marriages are very stable. Then maybe, in that situation, your state's not large. There's not a lot of risk out there. You may not need it. But for people that have estates of decent size, Nick, what would you say decent size would be? Over 1 million, definitely.
Yeah.
It depends on how many beneficiaries too, but maybe 2 to 5 million and above. You might want to start considering that.
And it's one of those things too where the second complexities enter the conversation, it's a pay now or pay later thing. Simple estate plan, you might not have to pay anything to do that. It could be as simple as just setting up beneficiary designations on an investment account. But if you do have wishes or desires to, protect against motivation when somebody falls into a lot of money one day, it's better to work with somebody that's competent. Make sure it's structured correctly up front, because if it's not, you're going to end up revisiting it later and paying attorney fees again down the line. So I'll use that as a transition, Ron. What's at stake when it comes to, everything that we're talking about? Estate planning done wrong, not making a plan, but having these desires.
So if you have that simple, traditional, easy plan, normally it's all about designations, getting the money to, your heirs, right? And that's okay. A lot of times it comes at a really bad time in their life because they just lost, and we're kind of assuming parents, right? So they're emotional. Maybe they're at a younger age and they're not as responsible, and they're exposed to, different life events. So with thoughtful planning, potentially, a trust, the money can be protected, preserve your values, the people funding the trust, and can help your children lead a better life if done correctly. So the issue isn't total control; it's safeguards. Think of it as guardrails, is the way I look at it.
And the thing that I would just want to reiterate before we close out is a good estate plan does not just address who gets what. What it's really addressing is, what do I want this money to do and for who? If you wouldn't hand a 25-year-old, $3 million, a $3 million check today, then why would the estate plan? And that's really what we're talking about. So the estate plans don't just transfer wealth. They they really transfer care, or like Ron said earlier, they transfer the values that you want to see people continue to live while you're not here. So we hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for tuning in, and please, as always, keep the topics coming. We certainly appreciate that.